All right, good morning. This is my update video talking about my 5 months of progress learning Latin. Dang, time flies. 5 months has already passed. I don't know if I should feel good about that or bad about that. I guess we'll talk about that. I want to try and get this short and sweet, this update, because I tend to ramble. So let's get to it. So number one, I want to talk about, first of all, my YouTube channel apparently is blowing up because somehow I have over 1,000 views on my updates, which I think is great. I don't have any intention of trying to be a YouTuber with Latin or anything like that, but it's cool that people are interested in my content. Again, my theory is that because there's so little Latin content being produced, if you start following Latin channels and are looking at them and watching those videos, Luca Ranieri and Carla and others, of course, feel like mine's probably going to come up there just because, again, it's like they need to recommend you something, and if you watch those videos, then they'll probably might recommend mine, I guess. That's cool. Again, great, people like it, I guess. What have I done the last month? I read about 45,000 words, which is a little disappointing. That's not as much as I wanted to read. Now, if you actually compare the statistics, it looks like I have 37,000 words read for the last month, but I'm about halfway through my current reader, which is about 17,000 words. That's why I add 8,000. So 1,500 words a day, it's not great. It's a little bit down from my last month. I think I had 3,000 or 4,000. Now, in my defense, I didn't really read any super easy readers this month. So like a beginner textbook and just read right through it, compared to like last month where I did do that, where I was able to get a bit more volume. So I'm going to try and get a bit more volume next month. But again, it's not that big a deal. It's fine. I just ideally would be reading more per day. But again, it's kind of in an awkward spot right now in terms of my reading. It's kind of I have to get over a hump because the easy stuff in a way is almost too easy. Like those in Roma in Italia est, that kind of thing, like too easy. But then there's it's just as soon as a bit more vocab starts to be introduced, then it becomes a little bit too challenging. So it's like the stuff that I'm getting most benefit from, that's roughly at my level. I feel like it's like I'm getting through it a little bit too slow almost. So I think I just have to push through and just keep on going. It's really, I think vocabulary is my main problem. I mean, again, grammar is not perfect, obviously, but vocabulary is, I think, the main thing holding me back right now. So there's that. So again, I'll try and read more than 45,000 words. Again, I won't put any kind of specific to that, but I'd like to have more than 1,500 words a day. But again, it's not the end of the world, but as long as I keep on reading, as long as I keep on exposing myself to Latin, I'll get better. I do notice that when I read relatively little one day, I feel like I pay for it the next day, because I notice it feels like I start to feel rusty even just one day later. So just keeping your brain in Latin helps a lot. Like doing 2 or 3 days just a week would probably, you're not going to make that much progress, I feel. So every single day, a significant amount of time is probably necessary. So now in terms of what I've read this month, let's go over it real quick. Didn't really, like I said, read any of the readers. It was recommended to go back and read Fabulae Surae, and my goal is to read that once I hit 300,000 words total read. I think it should be pretty approachable at that point. Certainly vocab wise, but grammar wise, hopefully as well. That's the plan at least. Because again, it's been 300. Hopefully after 250,000 words, I'll be somewhat better at Latin. And so what have I read this month? Just go over it real quick. I think I was reading Pons Tironum last time, and I think it was just uploaded to Legentibus, if you want to check that out. So it has a recording by Rafael Turigiano, I believe his name is. I only listened to the first part, but it seemed good, and I like that one mostly because it's pretty short, not too many words, but the main thing is that there's quite a lot of subjunctive. It's kind of explicitly I get the sense it was trying to drill it. I didn't mind that because I think I just need more subjunctive practice in general. I do find it annoying a lot of these readers seem to omit the subjunctive as if it's the final level of grammar, when again, maybe it's just because I'm used to it from French, but it never came across as particularly challenging concept in Latin. I'm sure, as I mentioned before, that there's a nuance of subjunctive in Latin that's different than French, but so far at least, the basics of it doesn't seem that different. And so I find it annoying that I don't get enough exposure to all those conjugations to get used to them. But I'm sure the more I read it, as I progress through my list, those will come up more and more. I don't think Septimus, my current reader uses it that much so far, but we'll talk about that. So I like that one. It's pretty short. It's a good read. Recommend it. Another one, A First Latin Reader by Vincent. Don't remember much about it other than it was a pretty good level, pretty enjoyable, not too hard, and definitely check it out. I skipped over, he had a second second one called a second Latin reader, and it seemed like a good like sequel to it, but the problem was it was mostly just Julius Caesar lightly adapted, and it was just a little bit too, again, it wasn't too hard, but it was just a bit too like pushing through the mud, getting through it. It was just going a little bit slow going, and it would have been fun, but I just decided I'll leave it for a little bit later. And then I did Initium, a first Latin course. I did not like this one. Super boring. It was sometimes very easy, sometimes extremely hard, with tons of vocab, with the repetition, I think was not done super well. And again, not very interesting at all to read, very boring. I don't remember like what the stories were, if it was made up stories or if they were Roman myths or something like that, but I'd probably skip that one. Again, it's just 6,000 words. It's not that much in terms of input, but it's probably not very good. Latin for Beginners by Douge, I think it's pronounced. Overall, good level of difficulty, but the difficulty ramped up a little bit too quickly at the end. As you can see, I took some notes because just to try and remember some of these readers. But again, this idea of ramping up the difficulty a bit too much at the end, it's a common pattern I noticed. Again, as I mentioned before, pretty good level, relatively good progression of difficulty, and then they're like, shoot, we only have 10% of the book left. Crank the difficulty so that we can call this a bridge to Julius Caesar. And then finally, Latin for Today, which is a much longer textbook. Found it in Antiquity, has read a couple of chapters from it. It's kind of sort of like Familia Romana, starting from super basic sentences and then building from there. But it's a pretty decent length book, 16,000 words, so again, half of Familia Romana, and not too many words, just overall good level of difficulty. It only ramped up in terms of the challenge right at like the last couple stories, so I would say I felt like a good level the whole time. Again, I wouldn't say I was super inspired reading it, but it was good. It was a recommended resource for sure, and again, especially because of how many words are in it. One thing you might notice is that often the difficulty is about the proportion of unique words to total words. So for example, Latin for Today has 16,000 words and 1,200 unique words, whereas something like Annulus Primus, I haven't read it yet, but my suspicion is that this is going to be a bit more challenging because even though it's the same number of unique words, it's over less reading. So the density is a factor. Like same thing over here. Some of these like Ora Maritima, Maritima, I'm not sure. That one I found pretty challenging, I think, because again, every 1 in 6 words would be a unique word, and it was pretty just challenging story overall, so it was a tough one. So again, as we mentioned before, this like ordering it based on unique words, it's not exactly the most ideal way of ordering it, but it's just something I'm figuring out right as I go. And what I'm working on right now is actually, I've alluded to this before, Septimus. Mostly because I just kind of was excited to read it. I was like, you know what, I feel like I can get through it. And I am getting through it. It's definitely a challenge. And it's a fun story, though I am enjoying it. There's certain a wry wit to it, I've noticed. I like the continuous narrative. And I like the difficulty as well. I think like the amount of like unknown vocab, I think is a good level. Like it's definitely a challenge. Like it's not like pure extensive reading where there's just like one word per page I don't know or something like that. It's not like that, definitely not. But it's like a good amount of words, and honestly, I just need more vocab, honestly. So it's relatively engaging and good, seems like useful vocab that I've been learning. So I've been enjoying it quite a lot. Again, it's fairly challenging. It's fairly mentally taxing. So it's relatively slow going, but I'm about halfway through. So I don't know. I get the sense that it doesn't like progress in terms of difficulty. It's roughly the same difficulty throughout. Maybe it's starting to be like slightly more difficult maybe as it goes along, but I don't know. Maybe I'll get much more difficult by the end. I don't know. But at least it's not like explicitly super, super easy sentences at the beginning and then it progresses from there. So it's relatively stable in terms of difficulty is what I noticed. So about halfway through it, it's going well and I'm enjoying it. So I recommend this reader. Again, I haven't read it completely yet, so I can't really say, but it seems really good so far. Now, the last thing I'll mention is that this book, Living Latin, A Greater Reader by, I believe it's the Paideia Institute. The Paideia, I think that's how it's pronounced, Institute. I think this is actually recommended by, I want to say Raphael recommended it as well. I don't remember. I was like, yeah, it seems good. And there's no way to get a PDF online, so I bought it, and it's not that expensive, and I've been enjoying it so far. I think I'm up to Lectico Septum. Lectico Septum? hopefully that's the word for 7. I don't know. My numbers, I've been doing a very laissez-faire thing with numbers in Latin. I've noticed, though, my ability to recognize them has increased over time, even though I've been very lazy with them, like not like trying to drill them, just let them wash over, because numbers are one of those things in language learning that are just annoying to learn. So I find just go with it. Don't try to explicitly memorize them, and little by little they'll come in. But yeah, I've been enjoying it. It's again a lot of dialogues, kind of almost like a modern textbook, like for a modern language. A lot of dialogues. Apparently it gets more difficult as it goes along, but it's a good level with the dictionary at the back, so I'm enjoying it. So I've been kind of going back and forth between Septimus and Living Latin, a graded reader. So there's that. So again, I need to just read more, honestly. It's been pretty busy at work and life in general, so it's not that big a deal, but I would like to make it my goal to read more than I did last month, because last month was not the greatest in terms of how much I read. There we go. All right, so other things to mention real quick. If you haven't seen it, I've also kind of started, this is a work in progress, and it's by no means done, but I've been like theory crafting a little bit about what would be the optimal way of reading through all this stuff. And again, some of these numbers are inaccurate for now, but the basic idea is there's different stages of this. So I think the first stage, when you're starting to read Latin, if you're learning in kind of the way I'm learning it, it's basically reading through the first 25 chapters of Familia Romana. And again, not the perfect textbook, but based on what I've read in other textbooks, it's the best we got so far. So chapters 1 through 25, so you read chapter 1, also read Colloquia Personarum, the first chapter that corresponds with that, and read the chapter that goes with Fabulae Latinae, and then read that, and also supplement with YouTube. So I found an Antiquity has the easy playlists. Go through those, and because I thought about like adding other like readers and stuff in this part, but honestly, you got enough on your plate. I think that's enough reading. I don't know I haven't figured out what the exact number is, but it's like not enough to really internalize all these concepts. But I think just accept that you're not going to understand everything. But I think that's just go through each one as you go along and power through, get through those first 25 chapters. Because after those first 25 chapters, there's not like that many new concepts, honestly, in the last 10 chapters. Like there are, it's going to take a while to absorb them anyway, so I wouldn't sweat it. So yeah, that's the step one. First 25 chapters. Fabulae Latinae actually goes up to 35, but most of the content is just the first 25 chapters. So I haven't you could like read through it if you wanted, or just save the rest of that book until you get to the end of stage 2. All right, so that after you've done the first 25 chapters, I think you should also do Anki. So I have an Anki deck. I can link it in the description. You can use that if you like. It's not perfect, but it does the job. And yeah, probably what you want to do is read the first chapter, then read the corresponding chapters in each of those supplements, and then go back and reread the chapter again, and then move on to the second one. I think that's a decent balance of repetition and novelty. And then once you've done that for the first 25 chapters, it's going to be a slog. It's not going to be easy, definitely not. But I think that's a reasonable approach. And then stage 2 is basically finishing the last 10 chapters of Familia Romana while at the same time supplementing it with other sources. So my proposed optimal strategy is read chapter 26, then read the Cambridge Latin course, all of book 1, if you can get it, 6,500 words. It's a good amount of input. And then read the novella Sisyphus, which is about 1,500 words. So, and relatively few unique words. The basic idea is for every chapter of Familia Romana, you want to read about 10,000 words of input on top of that. And because again, and it's not that these are corresponding to Familia Romana, it's just purely getting more reading fluency in general. And so the content that is being matched with chapters here is going to be significantly easier than what's actually you're going to be reading in Familia Romana. But I think that's good because you're going to need it's going to be very difficult to get through each chapter. It's going to be a slog with the vocab and the grammar, and then you need that. But you don't want to restrict yourself just to that because you're not going to be progressing through enough input. So I think about 10,000 words in addition. So again, same thing as before, read the chapter, do the Anki stuff, read through these. You could sentence mind them as well. It's probably a good idea, start a new deck. That's what I did. And then once you've done those, read through those, go back, reread the chapter 26, and then move on to chapter 27. Same idea, do the Cambridge Latin course book 2, read Cloelia Pula Romana. So that's again about 10,000 words. Those will be pretty easy in comparison. I don't actually remember how difficult book 2 is of Latin course. A lot of vocab, but should be okay. So it might take a while. Like it might be several days or so before you can go back or maybe a week or two before you go back to Familia Romana, but that's okay because you need some of the time for the vocabulary and concepts to sink in. And then chapter 28, and then I would say read through all the novice stories, like the easiest stories on Legentibus. It is paid, but honestly, 1 month of Legentibus should be enough to get through all this stuff if you're going purely from saving money. That's about 10,000 words. Do chapter 9, do his stories in easy Latin, all 4 volumes. That's about another 10,000 words. Chapter 30, Publio Bruti, his novella. Chapter 31, Cornelia, a new Latin primer, and Carolus et Maria, which now this one is quite a bit more reading here. This is 30,000 words, but I don't think that's a bad thing. Just because, again, it's going to take a while for some of these concepts to sink in with Familia Romana. So again, this is by no means set in stone, this list. But the main reason is that these are pretty easy readers, and there's a ton of, it's about the equivalent of Familia Romana with only 500 unique words. So you're going to get a ton of extensive reading practice. Just again, give your brain a break from that hard stuff through Familia Romana, and then get the more extensive reading. And then I just put them together because they're kind of a set. It's all the same vocab, and it's just a ton of reading. So I think it'll help a lot. And then chapter 32, Fabulae Latinae, volume 1 and 2 in Legentibus. Again, not the easiest reading, but with the interlinear translations and stuff, it's very manageable. And then chapter 33, do the Cambridge Latin Course Book 3. It's 12,000 words, so it's quite a lot. And then chapter 34, which is the last main chapter of the book, and then you're done. And then after that, you basically just go through the available readers out there. You can go through another textbook, like Ecce Romani, I think it's called. There's lots. But then on top of that, I suggest do Latin by the natural method right after you finish Familia Romana, because that's going to solidify all the major concepts. Lots of new vocab, or a bit of a new vocab, and it's a relatively good read because of the way they repeat vocab in that book and the grammar concepts. And then there's a few other suggestions from my list, and I figure I just put Fabulae Surai down here because I feel like once you've gone through all this, I feel like it should be approachable. I'm sure I can approach Fabulae Surai right now. I've looked a couple times at the text, and I'm like, wow, this is a lot easier than I remember, just because I have read a bit more. Again, this is not by any means done or any kind of definitive how to learn Latin at all, but it's just kind of when I'm procrastinating, it's a little bit of theory crafting. If you have any suggestions of how to optimize this list or improve on it, please let me know. Again, all these numbers are not accurate, okay? Also, if you haven't checked out The Cult of One True Textbook Has to Stop by Found in Antiquity, it's a banger of a video by Carla where she talks about the benefits and faults of Familia Romana, LLPSI, she calls it. I won't repeat the point she makes, but if you've watched my videos, I would say we're very much on the same wavelength of how to view that textbook. And I thought the most compelling thing she mentioned was that I've been ranting about the pensa and the exercises in it, and that she made the point that the pensa are more about unintentionally protecting the reputation of Familia Romana and less about helping students get more input and improving their Latin, because only the people who are extreme enough to reread the chapters to essentially brute force memorize the answers to those fill-in-the-blank exercises will progress, and most people will find them challenging and difficult and won't progress and then give up, and then we never hear about those people again. So there's survivor bias. We only hear from the people who are successful, and then there are probably many more people than I think people would assume fail out of Familia Romana and then never learn Latin as a result. I won't repeat the video. It's a great video. It goes over the history of the natural method and stuff, really cool, and kind of the difference between the natural method and comprehensible input and the input hypothesis. I'm not sure how much she talks about crashing, but again, ultimately she agrees that Lingua Latina, LLPSI or Familia Romana is the best textbook out there. But again, ultimately, it's not about one textbook. We just need to read much more. I also saw this cool post on Reddit recently where it talked about how much Latin is actually in classical Latin, before the fall of the Roman Empire, basically. And apparently it's about 10 million words, which is really not that much. Oh, I guess 7.5 million words in classical Latin up to 200 AD. Again, I don't know how accurate that is, but that's an amazing number because, again, that's almost exactly how much I read in French before I started learning Latin, which just kind of goes to show how tiny the classical Latin corpus is. And then it says, but again, it's as has been mentioned, in many Latin videos, that the classical Latin that we know Julius Caesar, Cicero. Cicero is like 10-15% of the corpus. It's relatively small, like again, compared to all this medieval Latin and the Renaissance Latin and Neo-Latin that's out there. So obviously limiting yourself only to the classical Latin that exists is very limiting. And like honestly, you should be able to read through all of it. Like 7 million words is actually not that much. Like again, I literally read that in French, and it's about the equivalent. I think like the total amount of Latin on the Perseus digital library is about 10 million. So maybe 7.5 million is up to a little bit later, so it adds a bit more to it. But I think the number that seemed to be the most reasonable was 10 million on that website. So maybe it's more. I don't know if it says here that the total size is 30 to 40 million words. I don't know if that's true, but if it is 10 million words, you could literally read that, like everything, literally all of the classical corpus in a reasonable time. That's about 150 books of like average novel length, which is like, it's obviously a lot, and most people don't do that, but it's certainly very possible within 5-10 years. But again, if we're talking 30 to 40 million words, then that's more of a lifetime achievement, I would say. And I imagine the total amount of Latin written, I don't know if I don't know, it would be a lot. So obviously you couldn't read everything out there, but if the classical Latin is only 10 million words roughly, or it says here 7.5, like again, you could literally just read it all if you wanted to, if you were focused and you're like reading every day. It wouldn't be easy, but so I thought that was interesting. It kind of shows how little Latin there is surviving, unfortunately. But that's what happens when there's a collapse of civilization, I guess. Okay, so there's that. I don't really have much else to say. I've kind of talked a lot already. Let's just do a little bit of Anki and wrap it up. So just to look at some statistics. So my sentence mining deck is currently at 573 words. Cool. So adding that to what I learned from Familia Romana, a little 2,100 words I've learned memorized in Latin with a little bit of repetition. So that's cool. And in terms of the deck, as I mentioned in the previous video, I suspend any cards that have an interval more than 3 months. So I actually only have 670 cards in this deck still, and probably over the next 2 or 3 months, most of the cards will be suspended. And then maybe I'll just pull the Band-Aid and then call it quits with that. All right, let's do a couple. I haven't studied yet, so let's check it out. All right, let's just do 2 cards each, and then we'll call it. All right, I'll read it out loud. Try this out. Metu igitur okay. Metu igitur deposito stetit. So this means his fear left aside, he stopped, or she stopped, or remained, I guess. Close enough. I'll give it to myself. All right. Toga est vestimentum album quod viri et pueri Romani gerunt. Probably messed up some of those vowels, long vowels, but all right. So anyways, this is pretty easy, of course. Toga is white, and which is what men and Roman boys and men wear. And interesting, I've been reading it in some of the readers, they talk about the difference between what boys would wear versus men would wear, and there's different colors they would wear, marking the emergence of adulthood. So gerunt, to wear. Cool. So that was pretty easy. So I'll quit while I'm ahead, but let's go to my sentence mining deck. Let's do a couple of cards there. Ob illud factum magna laus Herculi semper tributa. So this one is because of that fact, I guess. Hercules was always with great praise, always tributed towards, or tributed, or praised, I guess. I think that's my understanding of the sentence. It's possible it's a little flawed. Laus just means like praise, and then tributa, I'm assuming, means like to give the praise. And Hercules, I'm pretty sure is dative, so it makes sense in my brain. I'm not very good at breaking it down, so hopefully that was correct. Let's do one more. I said, quis tues, qui vestes ita novas geris. Again, probably messed that up, but this is from Septimus, actually. And Septimus or Septimus? I think it's Septimus. But who are you? Who wears such strange clothes? Or, but yeah, something like that. I don't know if that's technically literally what it says, but that's what it means. And yeah, noas, which noas I always knows. I always thought was like new, but it can also mean like unusual or strange. That's how it's used in Septimus. So anyways, that's what I'm at with Anki. So that's it. So my goal is to read a little bit more than I read last month, just because again, last month was not that great. I would say 1,500 words per day is pretty light. So we want to step that up a little and just keep on going through and hopefully finish the Fabuli Surae. Yeah, that's it. All right. Have a good day. Bye.